Right. But he was here. What's up? It's time for some Portable Nietzsche, as edited, translated by Walter. Oop. Immediately. Like clockwork. 8:03. Sure. Oh, alright. I'm just gonna go ahead and dig into this. Once I get my setup all sorted up. Oh yes. Oh, of course it's not perfect. There we go. All right. Silence phone. Skirmishes of an untimely man. My impossible ones, Senka, or the Toreador virtue. Rousseau, Sal, or the return to nature in Impurus Naturibus, Schiller, or the mortal trumpeter of Sakaginen. Dante, the hyena, who writes poetry in tombs, can't as an intelligible. Victor Hugo, or the pharaohs of at the sea of nonsense, Lisette, or the school of smoothness, with women, George Sand, or Lacti Ubertas. Translation: the milk cow with a beautiful style. Michelet, or the enthusiasm which takes off its coat. Carlyle, or pessimism is a poorly digested dinner. John Stuart Mill, or insulting clarity. Les Ferres de Goncourt, or the two Ajaxes in the battle with Homer. Music by Offenbach. Zola, or the delight of stinking. I think this is just a long list of philosophers that Nietzsche not enjoy. Renan, theology, or the corruption of reason by the original sin, Christianity. Witness Renan, who, why do I have my headset on? Oh, liberate my ears. Witness Renan, who, whenever he risks a yes or a no of more general nature, scores a miss with painful regularity. He wants, for example, to weld together la science and la noblesse, but la science belongs with democracy. What could be plainer? With no little ambition, he wishes to represent an aristocracy of the spirit. Yet at the same time, he is on his knees before its every counter doctrine. The Evangel des Humbles. I don't speak any of these languages. And not only on his knees. To what avail is all free spiritedness, modernity, mockery, and wry neck suppleness? If in one's guts one is still a Christian, a Catholic in fact, a priest, Renan is the most inventive, just like a Jesuit and Father Confessor, when it comes to seduction. His spirituality does not even lack the broad, fat, popish smile, like all priests. He becomes dangerous only when he loves. Nobody can equal him when it comes to adoring in a manner endangering life itself. The spirit of Renan, a spirit which is venerated, is more calamity for poor, sick France. Is one more calamity for poor, sick, and will sick France. Hold on. Small vibration. Saint Benevue. Nothing of virility, full of petty wrath against all virile spirits, wanders around cowardly, curious, bored, eavesdropping, a female at bottom, with a female's lust for revenge and a female's sensuality. As a psychologist, a genius for slender, inexhaustibly rich in means to that end. No one knows better how to mix praise with poison. Plebeian in the lowest instincts and related to the plebeian in the lowest instincts and related to the ressentiment of Rousseau. Consequently, a romantic, for underneath all romanticism lie the grunting and greed of Rousseau's instincts for revenge. A revolutionary, but still pretty well harnessed by fear, without freedom when confronted with anything strong. Without freedom when confronted with anything strong, public opinion, the academy, the court, even Port Royal, embittered against everything great in men and against things. Embittered against everything great in men and things, against whatever believes in itself. Poet and half-female, enough to sense the great as a power, always writhing like the famous worm because he always feels stepped upon, as a critic, without any standard steadiness. And backbone, with the cosmopolitan libertine's tongue for a medley of things, but without the courage even to confess his libertinage. Liberty, I guess. As a historian without philosophy, without the power of the philosophical eye, hence declining the task of judging in all significant matters, hiding behind the mask of objectivity. It is different with his attitude to all things, in which a fine, well-worn taste is the highest tribunal. There he really has the courage to stand by himself and delight in himself. There he is master, in some respects a preliminary version of Baudelaire. Yeah. De Imitation Christi is one of those books which I cannot hold in my hand without a psychological reaction. It exudes a perfume of the eternal feminine, which is strictly for Frenchmen or Wagnerians. This saint has a way of talking about love which arouses even Parisian women to curiosity. I am told that the cleverest of Jesuits, who wanted to lead his Frenchmen to Rome via the detour of science, found his inspiration in this book. I believe it, The Religion of the Heart. Eliot. 5. So this is section 5 of this. Boy, Eliot. They are rid of the Christian God and now believe all the more firmly that they must cling to Christian morality. That is an English consistency. We do not wish to hold it against little moralistic females, la Eliot. In England, one must rehabilitate oneself a la Eliot. In England, one must rehabilitate oneself after every little emancipation from theology by showing in a veritable awe-inspiring manner what a moral fanatic one is. That is the penance they pay there. We others hold otherwise. When one gives up the Christian faith, one pulls the right to Christian morality out from under one's feet. This morality is by no means self-evident. This point has to be exhibited again and again, despite the English flatheads. Christianity is a system, a whole view of things, thought out together. By breaking one main concept of it, the faith in God, one breaks the whole. Nothing necessary remains in one's hands. Christianity presupposes that man cannot know what is good for him, what evil he believes in God, who alone knows it. Christian morality is a command. Its origin is transcendent. Where are we at here with the camera? It's fine, whatever. It has truth only if God is truth. It stands and falls with the faith in God. When the English actually believe that they know intuitively what is good and evil, when they therefore suppose that they no longer require Christianity as the guarantee of morality, we merely witness the effects of the dominion of the Christian value judgment and an expression of the strength and depth of this dominion, such that the origin of English morality has been forgotten, such that the very conditional character of its right to existence is no longer felt, for the English morality is not yet a problem. George Sand. I read the first letters d'un voyageur, like everything that is descended from Rousseau. False, fabricated, bellows, exaggerated. I cannot stand this motley wallpaper style any more than the mob aspiration for generous feelings. The worst feature, to be sure, is the female there's a Q in that. Coquetry with male attributes, with the manners of naughty boys. Help. Phone, save me. I don't know this word. Fair, I'm having quite the time reading anyway. Not that it's unique to today, but definitely on mind. Okay, so C-O Q U U E T R. An affectation of. Let's see. Coquetry. Coquetry? Can I get a pronunciation of that? That'd be rad. Oh, it's French. Sure. Wanton. Flirtatious behavior or flirtatious manner. Let's see what dictionary.com can here. Behavior or arts of a coquette. Flirtation. Dalliance. Trifling. Anytime now. Coquetry. Is it that hard? It must have been that hard. Hello. Wrecked motherfucker. Are you talking to yourself? No, I'm reading to myself. It's far different. And technically all talking on the internet is talking to yourself. The worst feature, to be sure, is the female's coquetry with male attributes, with the manners of naughty boys. How cold she must have been thought throughout. This insufferable artist. She wound herself like a clock and wrote. Cold like Hugo, like Balzac. That's an unfortunate name. Like all the romantics as soon as they took up poetic invention. And how self-satisfied she may have lain there all the while, this fertile writing cow who had in her something German in the bad sense, like Rousseau himself, her master, and who in any case was possible only during the decline of French taste, but Renan reverses her. 7. Moral for psychologists. Not to go in for black stare psychology, never to observe in order to observe. That gives a false perspective, leads to squinting, and something forced and exaggerated. Experience, as the wish to experience does not succeed. One must not eye oneself while having an experience, else the eye becomes an evil eye. A born psychologist guards instinctively against seeing in order to see. The same is true of the born painter. He never works from nature. He leaves it to his instinct, to his camera obscura, to shift through and express the case nature, that which is experienced. He is he is conscious only of what is general, of the conclusion, the result. He does not know arbitrary abstractions from an individual case. What happens when one proceeds differently? For example, if, in the manner of the Parisian novelist, one goes in for backstair psychology and reads in gossip wholesale and retail. Then one lies in wait for reality, as it were, and every evening one brings home a handful of curiosities. But note what finally comes of all of this: a heap of splotches, a mosaic at best, but in any case something added together, something restless, a mess of screaming colors. The worst in this respect is accomplished by the Goncourts. They do not put three sentences together without really hurting the eye, the psychologist's eye. Nature, estimated artistically, is no model. It exaggerates, it distorts, it leaves gaps. Nature is chance. To study from nature seems to me to be a bad sign. It betrays submission, weakness, fatalism. This lying in the dust before petite fates is unworthy of a whole artist. To see what is, that is the mark of another kind of spirit, the anti-artistic, the factual. One must know who one is. 8. Toward a psychology of the artist. If there is to be one art, there is to be any aesthetic doing and seeing. One psychological condition is indispensable: frenzy. Frenzy must first have enhanced the excitability of the whole machine, else there is no art. All kinds of frenzy, however diversely conditioned, have the strength to accomplish this. Above all, the frenzy of sexual excitement, the most ancient and original form of frenzy. Also the frenzy that follows all great carvings, all strong effects, the frenzy of feasts, contests, feats of daring, victory, and all extreme movement, the frenzy of cruelty, the frenzy in destruction, the frenzy under certain meteorological influences, as for example the frenzy of spring, or under the influence of narcotics, and finally the frenzy of will, the frenzy of an overcharged and swollen will. What is essential in such frenzy is the feeling of increased strength and fullness. Out of this feeling one lends to things, one forces them to accept from us, one violates them. This process is also called idealizing. Let us get rid of a prejudice here. Idealizing does not consist, as is commonly held, in subtracting or discounting the petty and inconsequential. What is decisive is rather a tremendous drive to bring out the main features so that the others disappear in the process. In this state, one enriches everything out of one's own fullness. Whatever one sees, whatever one wills, is seen, swelled, taut, strong, overloaded with strength. A man in this state transforms things until they mirror his power, until they are reflections of his perfection. This having to transform into perfection is art. Even everything that he is not yet becomes for him an occasion of joy in himself. In art, man enjoys himself as perfection. It would be permissible to imagine an opposite state, a specific anti-artistry by instinct, a mode of being which would impoverish all things, making them thin and consumptive, and, as a matter of fact, history is rich in such anti-artists, in such people who are starved by life and must of necessity grab things, eat them out, and make them more meager. This is, for example, the case of the genuine Christian the case of the genuine Christian of Pascal, for example. A Christian who would at the time be an artist simply does not occur. A Christian who would at the time be an artist simply does not occur. One should not be childish and object. One should not be childish and object by naming Raphael or some homeopathic Christian of the 19th century. Raphael, yes. Raphael did, yes. Consequently, Raphael was no Christian. Raphael said yes. Raphael did, yes. Consequently, Raphael was no Christian. What is the meaning of conceptual opposites which I have introduced into aesthetics? Apollonian and Dionysian, both conceived as kinds of frenzy. The Apollonian frenzy excites the eye above all, so that it gains the power of vision. The painter, the sculptor, the epic poet are visionaries par excellence. In the Dionysian state, on the other hand, the whole affective system is excited and enhanced, so that it discharges all of its means of expression at once and drives forth simultaneously the power of representation, imitation, transfiguration, transformation, and every kind of mimicking and acting. The essential feature here remains the ease of metamorphosis, the inability not to react, similar to certain hysterical types who also upon any suggestion enter into any role. Not to react, the inability not to react. It is impossible for the Dionysian type not to understand any suggestion. He does not overlook any sign of an effect. He poses the instinct of understanding and guessing into the highest degree, just as he commands the art of communication in the highest degree. He enters into any skin, into any effect. He constantly transforms himself. Music, as we understand it today, is also a total excitement and total discharge of the effects, but even so, only the remnant of a much fuller world of expression of the effects, a mere residue of the Dionysian histrionicism. To make music possible as a separate art, a number of senses, especially the muscle sense, have been immobilized, at least relatively, for to a certain degree, all rhythm still appeals to our muscles, so that man no longer bodily imitates and represents everything he feels. Nevertheless, that is really the normal Dionysian state, at least the original state. Music is a specialization of this state attained slowly at the expense of those faculties which are most closely related to it. Grab a drink. I'm low on water. Should have filled this up before I started. The actor, the mime, the dancer, the musician, and the lyric poet are basically related in the instincts and at bottom one, but gradually they have become specialized and separated from each other, even to the point of mutual opposition. The lyric poet remained united with the musician for the longest time, the actor with the dancer. The architect represents neither Dionysian nor Apollonian state. Here it is the great act of will, the will that moves mountains, the frenzy of the great will which aspires to art. The most powerful human beings have always inspired architects. The architect has always been under the spell of power. His buildings are supposed to render pride visible, and the victory over gravity, the will to power. Architecture is a kind of eloquence of power in forms, now persuading, even flattering, now only commanding. The highest feeling of power, and the sureness finds expression in a grand style. The power which no longer needs any proof, which spurns pleasing, which does not answer lightly, which feels no witness near, which lives oblivious of all opposition. Lives oblivious in all opposition to it, which reposes within itself, fantastically, a law among laws that speaks of itself as a grand style. Hmm. I have been reading the life of Thomas Carlyle, this unconscious and involuntary farce, this heroic, moralistic interpretation of dyspeptic states. Oh man, can't get this foot somewhere. Carlyle, a man of strong words and attitudes, a rhetor from need, constantly lured by the craving for a strong faith and the feeling of his incapacity for it, in this respect a typical romantic. The carving for a strong faith is no proof of a strong faith, but quite the contrary. If one has such a faith, then one can afford the beautiful luxury of skepticism. One is sure enough, firm enough, has ties enough for that. Carlyle drugs something in himself with the fortismo of his veneration of men of strong faith, and with his rage against the less simple-minded. He requires noise, a constant, passionate dishonesty against himself. That is his proporium. In this respect, he is and remains interesting. Of course, in England he is admired precisely for his honesty. Well, that is English, and in view of the fact that the English are the people of consummate cant, it is even as it should be, and not only comprehensible. Because cant in this is it's no apostrophe. Cant. Maybe it's speech. That is an H, doesn't it? At bottom, Carlyle is an English atheist who makes it a point of honor not to be one. Emerson. This is just, he is totally... Alright, this shoe's got to go. This is definitely the part where Nietzsche goes on a massive rage against all other philosophers. Because that, I guess, is one of his more well-known things, is that he doesn't like any other philosophers but himself. I'd argue he doesn't like himself, but well. Emerson. Much more enlightened, more roving, more manifold, subtler than Carlyle, above all, happier. One who instinctively nourishes himself only on ambrosia, leaving behind what is indigestible in things. Compared with Carlyle, a man of taste, Carlyle, who loved him very much, nevertheless said of him, "He does not give us enough to chew on," which may be true, but is no reflection on Emerson. Emerson has that gracious and clever cheerfulness which discourages all seriousness. He simply does not know how old he is already and how young he is going to be. He could say of himself, quoting Lope de Vega, translation down here, "I am my own heir." So, yo me securo a mí mismo. Don't mind me butchering other languages, I hope. His spirit always finds reason for being satisfied and even grateful, and at times he touches on the cheerful transcendency of the worthy gentleman who returned from an amorous rendezvous tamquam re bene gesta. So here we go. As if he had accomplished his mission, though the power is lacking, the lust is nevertheless praiseworthy. Although, okay. Anti-Darwin. As for the famous struggle for existence, so far it seems to me to be asserted rather than proved. It occurs but as an exception. The total appearance of life is not the extremity, not starvation, but rather riches, profusion, even absurd squandering. And where there is struggle, it is a struggle for power. One should not mistake Malthus for nature. Malthus, it's a capitalized name. Assuming, however, that there is such a struggle for existence, and indeed it occurs, Its result is unfortunate, the opposite of what Darwin's school desires, and of what one might perhaps desire with them, namely in favor of the strong, the privileged, the fortunate exceptions. The species do not grow in perfection. The weak prevail over the strong again and again, for they are the great majority, and they are also more intelligent. In italics. Darwin forgot the spirit, that is English. The weak have more spirit. One must need spirit to acquire spirit. One loses it when one no longer needs it. Whoever has strength dispenses with the spirit. Let it go, they think in German today. The Reich must remain to us. So there's a reference quotation from Luther's most famous hymn, Ein feste Berg. In original context, Reich refers to the kingdom of God. It will be noted that by spirit I mean care, patience, cunning, simulation, great self-control, and everything that is mimicry. The latter includes a great deal of so-called virtue. Of course, speaking to the nature of, or at very least Darwinism as applied to social situations, because it definitely, or at the very least, does not apply, or at least I would assume, not apply to Darwin's theory of evolution. Interesting. Excuse me. Quite a burp. Casuistry of psychologists. This man knows human nature. Why does he really study people? He wants to seize little advantages over them, or big ones, for that matter. He is a politician. That one over there also knows human nature, and you say that he seeks no profit for himself, that he is thoroughly impersonal. Look more closely. Perhaps he even wants a worse advantage, to feel superior to other human beings, to be able to look down on them, and no longer mistake himself for one of them. This impersonal type is a despiser of human beings, while the first type is a more humane species, appearances notwithstanding. At least he places himself on the same plane. He places himself among them. The psychological tact of the Germans seems very questionable to me, in view of quite a number of cases which modesty prevents me from enumerating. In one case I shall not lack a great occasion to substantiate my thesis. I bear the Germans a grudge for having made such a mistake about Kant and his backdoor philosophy, as I call it, for that was not the type of intellectual integrity. The other thing I do not like to hear is the notorious and. Notorious and. The Germans say Goethe and Schiller. I'm afraid they say Schiller and Goethe. Don't they know this Schiller yet? And there are even worse ands. With my own ears I have heard, if only among university professors, Schopenhauer and Hartmann. I have no clue what he's referencing there. The most spiritual human beings, if we assume that they are most courageous, also experience by far the most painful tragedies. But just for that reason, they honor life. Because it pits its greatest opposition against them on the intellectual conscience. Nothing seems rarer to me today than genuine hypocrisy. I greatly respect that the soft air of our culture is insalubrious for this plant. Hypocrisy belongs in the ages of strong faith. Hypocrisy belongs in the ages of strong faith when, even though constrained to display another faith, one did not abandon one's own faith. Today, one does not abandon it, or, even more commonly, one adds a second faith. And in either case, one remains honest, without a doubt. A very much greater number of convictions is possible today than formerly. Possible means permissible, which means harmless. This begets tolerance toward oneself. Tolerance towards oneself permits several convictions, and they get along with each other. They are careful, like all the rest of the world, not to compromise themselves. How does one compromise oneself today? If one is consistent, if one proceeds in a straight line, if one is not ambiguous enough to permit 5 conflicting interpretations, if one is genuine. I fear greatly that modern man is simply too comfortable for some vices, so that they die out by default. All evil that is a function of strong will, and perhaps there is no evil without strength of will, degenerates into virtue in our tepid air. A few hypocrites whom I have met imitated hypocrisy. Like almost every 10th person today, they were actors. Beautiful and ugly. Nothing is more conditional, or let us say narrower, than our feeling for beauty. Whoever would think of it apart from man's joy in man's world would immediately lose any foothold. Beautiful in itself is a mere phrase, not even a concept. In the beautiful, man posits himself as the measure of perfection. In special cases, he worships himself in it. A species cannot do otherwise, but thus affirm itself alone. Its lowest instinct, that of self-preservation and self-expansion, still radiates in such sublimities. Man believes the world itself to be overloaded with beauty, and he forgets himself as the cause of this. He alone has presented the world with beauty, alas, only with a very human, all too human beauty. At bottom, man mirrors himself in things. He considers everything beautiful that reflects his own image. The judgment beautiful is the vanity of his species. For little suspicion, many whisper this question into the skeptic's ear: is the world really beautified by the fact that man thinks it is beautiful? He has humanized it, that is all. But nothing, absolutely nothing, guarantees that man should be the model of beauty. Who knows what he looks like in the eyes of a higher judge of beauty? Daring, perhaps even amusing, perhaps a little arbitrary. O Dionysus, divine one, why do you pull me by my ears? Adrian, Aradine, Aradine once asked her philosophic lover during one of those famous dialogues on Greek. Damn you, Latin. I find a kind of humor in your ears, Aradine. Why are they not even longer? Nothing is beautiful except man alone. All aesthetics rests upon this naivety, which is its first truth. Let us immediately add the second. Nothing is ugly except the degenerating man. And with this, the realm of aesthetic judgment is circumscribed. Aesthetic judgment, not aesthetic. Aesthetic judgment is circumscribed. Physiologically, everything ugly weakens and saddens man. It reminds him of decay, danger, impotence. It actually deprives him of strength. One can measure the effect of the ugly with a dynameter. Whenever a man is depressed at all, he senses the proximity of something ugly. His feeling of power, his will to power, his courage, his pride, all fall with the ugly and rise with the beautiful. In both cases, we draw an inference to the premise for it. The premise for it are piled up in the greatest abundance in instinct. The ugly is understood as a sign and symptom of degeneration. Whatever reminds us in the least of generation causes in us the judgment of ugly. Every suggestion of exhaustion, of heaviness, of age, of weariness, every kind of lack of freedom, such as cramps, such as paralysis, and above all, the smell, the color, the form of dissolution, the decomposition, even in the ultimate attenuation into a symbol, all evoke the same reaction, the value, judgment, ugly. A hatred is aroused, but whom does man hate then? There is no doubt the decline of his type. Here he hates out of the deepest instinct of the species. In this hatred there is a shudder, caution, farsightedness. It is the deepest hatred there is. It is because of this that art is deep. Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer, the last German worthy of consideration, who represents a European event like Goethe, like Hegel, like Heinrich Heine, and not merely a local event, a national one, is for a psychologist a first-rate case, namely, as a malicious, ingenious attempt to adduce in favor of a nihilistic total depreciation of life precisely the counter instances, the great self-affirmations of the will to life. Life's forms of exuberance. He has interpreted art, heroism, genius, beauty, great sympathy, knowledge, the will to truth, and tragedy in turn as consequences of negation of the will's need to negate. The greatest psychological counterfeit in all history, not counting Christianity, on closer inspection. He is at this point merely the heir of the Christian interpretation. Only he knew how to approve that which Christianity had repudiated, the great cultural facts of humanity, albeit in a Christian, that is, nihilistic, manner, namely, as ways of redemption, as anticipations of redemption, as stimuli of the need for redemption. I take a single case. Schopenhauer speaks of beauty with a melancholy fervor. Why? Because he sees it in a bridge on which one will go farther, or develop a thirst to go farther. Beauty is for him a momentary redemption for the will, a lure to eternal redemption. Particularly, he praises beauty as the redeemer from the focal point of the will. From sexuality, in beauty he sees the negation of the drive towards procreation. Queer saint. Somebody seems to be contradicting you. I fear it is nature. To what end is there any such thing as beauty in tone, color, fragrance, or rhythmic movement in nature? What is it that beauty evokes? Fortunately, a philosopher contradicts him too. No lesser authority than that of the divine Plato, so Schopenhauer calls himself calls him, maintains a different proposition, that all beauty incites procreation, that just this is the proprium of its effect, from the most sensual up to the most spiritual. Plato goes further. He says, with an innocence possible only for a Greek, not a Christian, that there would be no Platonic philosophy at all if there were not such beautiful youths in Athens. It is only their sight that transposes the philosopher's soul into an erotic trance, leaving it no peace until it lowers the seed of all exalted things into such beautiful soil. Another queer saint. One does not trust one's ears, even if one should trust Plato. At least one guesses that they philosophized differently in Athens, especially in public. Nothing is less Greek than the conceptual web-spinning of a hermit, and more in the intellectual love of God, after the fashion of Spinoza. Philosophy, after the fashion of Plato, might rather be defined as an erotic contest, as a further development and turning inward of the ancient agnostic gymnasts and of its presuppositions. What ultimately grew out of this philosophic eroticism, oh my god, of Plato, a new art, a new art form of this Greek agon? Yeah. Dialectics. Finally, I recall against Schopenhauer and in the honor of Plato that the whole higher culture and literature of classical France, too, grew on the soil of sexual interest. Everywhere in everywhere in it one may look for amatory, the senses, the sexual contest, the woman. One will never look in vain. Everywhere in Yeah, alright, we'll just move on here. L'art pour l'art. L'art. Art pour l'art. The fight against purpose in art is always a fight against moralizing tendency in art, against its subordination to morality. L'art pour l'art means the devil take morality. But even this hostility still betrays the overpowering force of the prejudice. When the purpose of moral preaching and of improving man has been excluded from art, it still does not follow by any means that art is altogether purposeless, aimless, senseless. In short, l'art pour l'art, a worm chewing its own tail. Rather, no purpose at all than moral purpose. That is the talk of mere passion. A psychologist, on the other hand, asks, what does all art do? Does it not praise, glorify, choose, prefer? With all this, it strengthens or weakens certain evaluations. Is this merely a moreover, an accident? Something in which the artist's instincts had no share? Or is it not the very presupposition of the artist's ability? Does his basic instinct aim at art, or rather at the sense of art, at life, a desirability of life? Art is the greatest stimulus to life. How could one understand it as purposeless, as aimless, as art pour l'art, That will take morality. I don't know there. One question remains. Art also makes apparent much that is ugly, hard, and questionable in life. Does it not thereby spoil life for us? And indeed, there have been philosophers who attributed this sense to it. Liberation from the will was what Schopenhauer taught as the overall end of art, and with admiration he found the great utility of tragedy in its evoking resignation. But this, as I have already suggested, is the pessimist's perspective and evil eye. We must appeal to the artists themselves. What does the tragic artist communicate of himself? Is it not precisely the state without fear in the face of the fearful and questionable that he is showing? The state itself is a great desideratum. Whoever knows Whoever knows it honors it with the greatest honors. He communicates it, must communicate it, provided he is an artist, a genius of communication, courage and freedom of feeling before a powerful enemy, before a sublime calamity, before a problem that arouses dread. This triumphant state is what the tragic artist chooses, what he glorifies. Before tragedy, what is warlike in our soul celebrates its Saturnalia. Whoever is used to suffering, whoever seeks out suffering, the heroic man praises his own being through tragedy. To him alone, the tragedian presents this drink of sweetest cruelty. To put up with people, to keep an open house with one's heart, that is liberal. But that is merely liberal. One recognizes those hearts which are capable of noble hospitality. By the many draped windows and the closed shutters, they keep their best rooms empty. Why? because they expect guests with whom one does not put up. We no longer esteem. Hold on, let me see here. We no longer esteem ourselves sufficiently when we communicate ourselves. Our true experiences are not at all garrulous. They could not communicate themselves if they tried. That is because they lack the already what? Oh my. That is because they lack the right word. Whatever we have words for, that we have already got beyond. In all talk there is a grain of contempt. Language, it seems, was invented only for what is average, medium, communicable. With language, the speaker immediately vulgarizes himself, out of a morality for deaf-mutes and other philosophers. This picture is enchantingly beautiful. Quotation from the Magic Flute. The literary female, unsatisfied, exciting, her heart and entrails void, ever listening, full of painful curiosity, to the imperative which whispers from the depths of her organism, out libri, to either children or books. Library or library or library. Either children or books. The literary females, educated enough to understand the voice of nature even when it speaks Latin, and yet vain enough and goose enough to speak secretly with herself in French. I shall see myself. I shall ready myself, or I shall read myself. I shall go into ecstasies, and I shall say, it is possible that I should have had so much as is it possible that I should have had so much as spirit? The impersonal get a word in. Nothing is easier for us than to be wise, patient, and superior. We drip with the oil of forgiveness and sympathy. We are absurdly just. We pardon everything. For that every reason we ought to be little more strict with ourselves. For that very reason we ought to breed a little more effect in ourselves from time to time, a little vice of an effect. It may be hard on us, and among ourselves we may even laugh. At sight we thus offer. But what can be done about it? No other way of self-overcoming is left to us any more. This is our asceticism, our penance, developing personal traits, the virtue of the impersonal. From a doctoral examination. What is the task of all higher education? To turn men into machines? What are the means? Man must learn to be bored. How is that accomplished? By means of the concept of duty. Who serves as the model? The philologist. He teaches grinding. Who is the perfect man? The civil servant. Which philosophy offers the highest formula for the civil servant? Kant's. The civil servant as a thing in itself, raised up to be judge over the civil servant as phenomenon. The right to stupidity. The weary laborer who breathes slowly looks genial and lets things go as they may. This typical figure, encountered today in the age of labor and the Reich, in all cases of society, claims art no less as his own sphere, including books, and above all magazines, and even more the beauties of nature, Italy. The man of the evening, with his savage drives gone to sleep, as Faust says, needs a summer resort, the seashore, glaciers, Beiruts. In such ages, art has a right to pure foolishness, as a kind of vacation for the spirit, wit, and feeling. Wagner understood that. Pure foolishness restores. Wagner himself calls Parsifal, the pure fool. Parsifal. Another problem of diet. the means by which Julius Caesar defended himself against sickness and headaches, tremendous marches, the most frugal way of life, uninterrupted sojourn in the open air, continuous exertion. These are, in general, the universal rules of preservation and protection against extreme vulnerability of that subtle machine working under highest pressure, which we call genius. The immoralist speaks. Nothing offends the philosopher's taste more than man, insofar as man desires, if he could see man in action, even if he sees this most courageous, most cunning, most enduring animal lost in labyrinthian distress, how admirable man appears to him. He still likes him, but the philosopher desires the desiring man, also the desirable man, and altogether all desirabilities, all ideals of man. If a philosopher could be a nihilist, he would be one because he finds nothing behind all the ideals of man, or not even nothing, but only what is abject, absurd, sick, cowardly, and weary, all kinds of dregs out of the empty cup of his life. Man begins so venerable in his man begins so vulnerable in his reality. How is it that he deserves no respect in so far as he desires? He must atone for being so capable in reality. Must he balance his activity, the strain on head and will, in all his activity, by stretching his limbs in the realm of imaginary and absurd? The history of his desirabilities has so far been the parte en sous of man. One should beware of reading in it too long. What justifies man is his reality. It will eternally justify him. How much greater is the worth of the real man compared with any merely desired, dreamed up, foully fabricated man, with any ideal man, and it is only the ideal man who offers the philosopher's taste. I have an eye itch. Grab a drink of water again. Oh, what are we at the hour mark? Yes, we are. Almost 3 minutes off. So, at that, if you're enjoying it, I don't know, give it a follow. If not, give it a subscribe, clearly. By taking the links down below and finding my YouTube channel. Something wicked this way comes. The natural value of egoism. Self-interest is worth as much as the person who has it. It can be worth a great deal, and it can be unworthy and contemptible. Every individual may be scrutinized to see whether he represents the ascending or descending line of life. Having made that decision, one has a canon for the worth of his self-interest. If he represents the ascending line, then his worth is indeed extraordinary, and for the sake of life as a whole, which takes a step farther through him, the care for his preservation and for the creation of the best conditions for him may even be extreme. The single one, the individual, as hitherto understood by people and philosophers alike, is an error after all. He is nothing by himself, no atom, no link in the chain, nothing merely inherited from former ties. He is the whole single line of humanity up to himself. If he represents the descending development, decay, chronic degeneration, and sickness are, in general, the consequences of decay, not its causes, then he has small worth, and a minimum of decency requires that he take away as little as possible from those who have turned out well. He is merely their parasite. Christian and Antichrist. When the Antichrist When the Antichrist, as the mouthpiece of declining strata of society, demands with fine indignation what is right, justice, and equal rights, he is merely under the pressure of his own uncultured state, which cannot comprehend the real reason for his suffering. What is it that he is poor? What is it that he is poor in? Life? A casual instinct asserts itself in him. It must be somebody else's fault that he is in a bad way. Also, the fine indignation it soothes. Indignation, it soothes him. Itself soothes him. It is a pleasure for all wretched devils to scold. It gives a slight but intoxicating sense of power. Even plaintiveness and complaining can give life a charm for the sake of which one endures it. There is a fine dose of revenge in every complaint. One charges one's own bad situation and uncertain circumstance, even one's own badness, to those who are different, as if that were an injustice, a forbidden privilege. If I am Keneal, you ought to be too. Keneal. On such logic, revolutions are made. Keneal. I think that might mean like poor or impoverished, but I'm not sure. Check here. Keneal. C-A-N-A. Ill. Oops. That was not the correct password. Still not the correct password. Don't mind me. Just buggering around here. Probably even pronounced that wrong. Canal? Canal? Nope. Why would that be the first letter? Y. C-A-N-A-I-L-L-E. Riffraff. Oh, if I'm riffraff, you ought to be too. Keneal. Keneal? Keneal. Keneal. Alright, fine. Computer lady. You know best. I'll take your word for it. Complaining is never any good. It stems from weakness. Whether one charges one's misfortune to others or to oneself. The socialist does the former. The Christian, for example, the latter, really makes no difference. The common and, let us add, the unworthy thing is that it is supposed to be somebody's fault that one is suffering. In short, that the sufferer prescribes the honey of revenge for himself against his suffering. The objects of this need for revenge, as a need for pleasure, are mere occasion. Everywhere the sufferer finds occasion for satisfying his little revenge. If he is a Christian, to repeat it once more, he finds them in himself. The Christian and the Antichrist are both decadents. When the Christian condemns, slanders, and besmirches the world, his instinct is the same as that which prompts the socialist worker to condemn, slander, and besmirch society. The last judgment is the sweet comfort of revenge, the revolution, which the socialist worker also waits, but conceived as a little farther off. The beyond, why beyond, if not as a means for besmirching this world? Critique of the morality of decadence, an altruistic morality, a morality in which self-interest wilts away, remains a bad sign under all circumstances. This is true of individuals. It is particularly true of nations. The best is lacking when self-interest begins to be lacking. Instinctively, to choose what is harmful for oneself, to feel attracted by disinterested motives, that is virtually the formula of decadence. Not to seek one's own advantage, that is merely the moral fig leaf for quite a different, namely a psychological state of affairs. I no longer know how to find my own advantage. Disgregation? Disgregation of disgregation of the instincts. I'm not looking that one up. I'm bored. Humbugged looking up new words. Man is finished when he becomes altruistic. Instead of saying naively, I am no longer worth anything, the moral lie in the mouth of the decadent says, nothing is worth anything. Life is not worth anything. Such a judgment always remains very dangerous. It is contagious. Throughout the morbid soil of society, it soon proliferates into a tropical vegetation of concepts, now as a religion, Christianity, now as a philosophy, Schopenhauerism. Sometimes the poisonous vegetation which has grown out of such decomposition poisons life itself for millennia with its fumes. Morality for physicians. The sick man is a parasite of society. In a certain state it is indecent to live longer, to go on vegetating in cowardly dependence on physicians and machinations. After the meaning of life, the right to life has been lost. That ought to prompt a profound contempt in society. The physicians, in turn, would have to be the mediators of this contempt, not prescriptions. Mediators of this contempt, not prescriptions, but every day a new dose of nausea with their patients, to create a new responsibility, that of the physician, for all cases in which the highest interest of life, of ascending life, demands the most inconsiderate pushing down and aside of degenerating life. For example, for the right of procreation, for the right to be born, for the right to live. To die proudly when it is no longer possible to live proudly. Death freely chosen, death at the right time, brightly and cheerfully accomplished amid children and witness. The real farewell is still impossible, as the one who is taking leave is still there. Also the real estimate of what one has achieved and what one has wished, drawing the sum of one's life, all in opposition to the wretched and revolting comedy that Christianity has made of the hour of death. One should never forget that Christianity has exploited the weakness of the dying for rape of the consciousness, and the manner of death itself, for value judgments about man and the past. Here it is important to defy all cowardices of prejudice and to establish, above all, the real, that is, the physiological appreciation of so-called natural death, which is in the end also unnatural, a kind of suicide. One never perishes through anybody but oneself, but usually it is death under the most contemptible conditions, an unfree death, death not of the right time, a coward's death. From the love of life one should desire a different death, free, conscious, without accident, without ambush. Finally, some advice for our dear pessimists and other decadents. It is not in our hands to prevent our birth, but we cannot correct this mistake, for in some cases it is a mistake. When one does away with oneself, one does the most estimable thing possible. One almost earns the right to live. Society, what am I saying? Life itself derives more advantage from this than from any life of renunciation, anemia, and other virtues. One has liberated the others from one sight. One has liberated life from an objection. Pessimist, pervert, is proved only by the self-refutation of our dear pessimists. One must advance a step further in its logic, and not only negate life with will and representation, as Schopenhauer did. One must first negate all Schopenhauer. Incidentally, However contagious pessimism is, it still does not increase the sickliness of an age, of a generation as a whole. It is an expression of this sickliness. One falls victim, one falls victim to it as one falls victim to cholera. One has to be morbid enough in one's whole predisposition. Pessimism itself does not create a single decadent more. I recall the statistics which show that the years in which cholera rages do not differ from the years in the total number of deaths. From years in the total number. Okay. Interesting concept in and of itself. Whether we have become more moral, against my conception of beyond good and evil, as was to be expected, the whole ferocity of moral habitation, mistaken for morality itself in Germany, as is well known, has gone into action. I could tell fine stories about that. Above all, I was asked to consider the undeniable superiority of our age in moral judgment, the real progress we have made here, compared with us, a Caesar Borgia is by no means to be represented after my manner as a higher man, a kind of overman. A Swiss editor of the Bund went so far that he understood the meaning of my work, not without expressing his respect for my courage and daring to be a demand for the abolition of all decent feelings. Thank you. In reply, I take the liberty of raising the question whether we have really become more moral. That all the world believes this to be the case merely constitutes an objection. We modern men, very tender, very easily hurt, and offering as well as receiving consideration 100-fold, really have the conceit that this tender humanity which we represent, this attained unanimity, is in sympathetic regard, in readiness to help, in mutual trust, represents positive progress, and that in this respect we are far above the men of the Renaissance. But that is how every age thinks, how it must think. What is certain is that we may not place ourselves in Renaissance conditions, not even by an act of thought. Our nerves would not endure that reality, not to speak of our muscles. But such incapacity does not prove progress, only another, later constitution. One which is weaker, frailer, more easily hurt, and which necessarily generates a morality rich in consideration. Were we to think away our frailty and latentness, our physiological senescence, then our morality of humanization would immediately lose its value too. In itself, no morality has any value. It would even arouse disdain. On the other hand, let us not doubt that we moderns, with our thickly padded humanity, which at all cost wants to avoid bumping into a stone, would have provided Caesar Borgia's contemporaries with a comedy at which they could have laughed themselves to death. Indeed, we are unwittingly funny beyond all measure with our modern virtues. The decrease in instincts which are hostile and arouse mistrust, and that is all our progress amounts to, represents but one of the consequences attending the general decrease in vitality. It requires 100 times more trouble and caution to make so conditional and late an existence prevail. Hence each helps the other. Hence everyone is to a certain extent sick. Everyone is a nurse for the sick. And that is called virtue among men who still knew life differently, fuller, more squandering, more overflowing. It would have been called by another name, cowardice perhaps, wretchedness, old ladies' morality. Our softening of manners, that is my proposition, that is, if you will, my innovation, is a consequence of decline. The hardness and terribleness of our morals, conversely, can be a consequence of an excess of life. For in that case, much may also be dared, much challenged, and much squandered. What was once the spice of life would be poison to us. To be indifferent, that too is a form of strength. For that we are likewise too old, too late. Our morality of sympathy, against which I was the first to issue a warning, that which one might call la impersonum morale, is just another expression. Impressionism morale is just another expression of that psychological overexcitability which is characteristic of everything decadent, that movement which tried to introduce itself scientifically to Schopenhauer's morality of pity, a very unfortunate attempt. An attempt is the real movement of decadence in morality. As such, it is profoundly related to Christian morality. Strong ages, noble cultures consider pity, neighbor love, and the lack of self and self assurance something contemptible. Ages must be measured by their positive strength, and then that lavishly squandered and fatal age of Renaissance appears as the last great age, and we moderns, with our anxious self-solitude and our neighbor love, with our virtues of work, modesty, legality, and scientism, accumulating economic machine-like, appear as a weak age. Our virtues are conditional on, are provoked by our weakness. Equality, as a certain fractional increase in similarity, which merely finds expression in theory of equal rights, is an essential feature of decline. The cleavage between man and man, status and status, the plurality of types, the will to be oneself, to stand out, what I call the pathos of distance, that is a characteristic of every strong age. The cleavage between man and man, status and status, the plurality of types, the will to be oneself, to stand out, is what I call the pathos of distance, that is characteristic of every strong age. Now that, interesting thought from Nietzsche. The status, cleavage of man and man, status and status, the plurality of all types, the will to be oneself and to stand out, what I call the pathos of distance, that is the characteristic of every strong age. The strength to withstand tension, the width of the tensions between extremes becomes ever smaller today. Finally, the extremes themselves become blurred to the point of similarity. Stuck to myself. All our political theories and constitutions and the German Reich is by no means an exception. Is by no means an exception. Got a burp. It's like it's in there, but it's not coming out. Ugh. Hurts. Oh. There we go. Is by no means an exception. Are consequences, necessary consequences of decline. The unconscious effect of decadence has assumed mastery even over the ideals of some of the sciences. My objection against the whole of sociology. My objection against the whole of sociology in England and France remains that it knows from experience only forms of social decay, and with perfect innocence accepts its own instincts of decay as the norm of sociological value judgments. The decline of life, the decrease in power to organize, that is, to separate, tear open clefts, subordinate and superordinate, all this has been formulated as the ideal in contemporary sociology. Our sociologists are decadents, but Mr. Herbert Spencer is a decadent too. He considers the triumph of altruism desirable. The decline of life, a decrease in the power to organize, that is, to separate, tear open clefts, subordinate, and superordinate. All this has been formulated as the ideal in contemporary sociology. I wonder if it still is. I think to some extent, perhaps so. Taken some sociology courses in my lifetime, and I would say that now the study definitely more about how humans interact and interact with each other, which is arguably a more refined and more accurate study than I think what Nietzsche may be referring to at this point in time. But anyway, my conception of freedom. The value of a thing sometimes does not lie in that which one attains by it, but in what one pays for it, what it costs us. I shall give you an example. Liberal institutions cease to be liberal as soon as they are attained. Later on, there are no worse and no more thorough injurers of freedom than liberal institutions. Their effects are known well enough. They undermine the will to power. They level every mountain and valley and call that morality. They make men small and cowardly and hedonistic. Every time, it is the herd animal that triumphs with them. Liberalism, in other words, herd animalization. These same institutions produce quite different effects while they are still being fought for. Then they really promote freedom in a powerful way. One closer inspection, it is war that produces the effects. The war for liberal institutions, which as a war permits liberal instincts to continue, and war educates for freedom. For what is freedom? That one has the will to assume responsibility for oneself, that one maintains the distance which separates us, that one becomes more indifferent to difficulties, hardships, privation, even to life itself, that one is prepared to sacrifice human beings for one's cause, not excluding oneself. Freedom means that the manly instincts which delight in war and victory dominate over the other instincts, for example, over those of pleasure. The human being who has become free, and how much more the spirit who has become free, spits on the contemptible type of well-being deemed by shopkeepers, Christians, cows, females, Englishmen, and other democrats. The free man is a warrior. How is freedom measured in individuals and people? According to the resistance which must be overcome, according to the exertion required to remain on top. The highest type of free man should be sought where the highest resistance is constantly overcome. 5 steps from tyranny, close to the threshold of the danger of servitude. This is true psychology. If by tyrants are meant inexorable and fearful instincts that provoke the maximum of authority and discipline against themselves, most beautiful type, Julius Caesar. This is true politically too. One need only to go through history. The peoples who had some value attained some value, never attained it under liberal institutions. It was great danger that made something of them that merits respect. Danger alone acquaints us with our own resources, our own virtues, our armor and weapons, our spirit, and forces us to be strong. First principle, one must need to be strong, otherwise one will never become strong. Okay. Those large hothouses for the strong, for the strongest kind of human being that has so far been known, the aristocratic commonwealths of the type of Rome or Venice understood freedom exactly in the same sense in which I understand it, as something one has or does not have, something one wants, something one conquers. I don't know how on board I am here with some of this talk of freedom, but arguably so, I guess. If I were to look at my own struggles, I guess loneliness would be one of them. And what was it? One must seem to be strong. Where the hell was this? Danger. I guess my loneliness is danger. My own resources has taught me to embrace my loneliness, or embrace my own apprehension, my own spirit, so I can be strong. Or at the very least, I think I'm strong. Who knows? But critique of modernity. Our institutions are no good anymore. On that there is universal agreement. However, it is not their fault but ours. Once we have lost all instincts out of which institutions grow, we lose institutions altogether, because we are no longer good for them. Democracy has ever been the form of decline in organizing power. Inhuman, all too human, 1:472, I already characterized modern democracy, together with its hybrids such as the German Reich, as the form of decline of the state. In order that there may be institutions, there must be a kind of will, instinct, or imperative, which is anti-liberal, to the point of malice, the will to tradition, to authority, to responsibility for centuries to come, to the solidarity of chains of generations, forward and backward ad infinitum. When this will is present, something like the Imperium Romanum is founded, or like Russia, the only power today which has endurance, which can wait, which can still promise something. Russia, the concept that suggests the opposite of the wretched European nervousness and system of small states, which has entered a critical phase with the founding of the German Reich. The whole of the West no longer possesses the instinct out of which instinct grows, out of which institutions grow, out of which a future grows. Perhaps nothing antagonizes its modern spirit so much. One lives for the day, one lives very fast, one lives very irresponsibly. Precisely, this is called freedom. That which makes an institution. An institution is despised, hated, repudiated. One fears the danger of new slavery the moment the word authority is even spoken aloud. That is how far decadence has advanced in the value instincts of our politicians, of our political parties. Instinctively, they prefer what disintegrates, what hastens the end. Witness modern marriage. A rationality has clearly vanished from modern marriage, yet that is no objection to marriage, but to modernity. The rationality of marriage that lay in the husband's sole juridical responsibility, which gave marriage a center of gravity, while today it limps on both legs. The rationality of marriage that lay in its indissolubility in principle, which lent it an accent that could be heard above the accident of feeling, passion, and what is merely momentary. It also lay in the family's responsibility for the choice of a spouse. With the growing indulgence of love matches, the very foundation of marriage has been eliminated. That which alone makes an institution of it. Never, absolutely never, can an institution be founded on idiosyncrasy. One cannot, as I have said, found marriage on love. It can be founded on the sex drive, on the property drive, wife and child as property, on the drive to dominate, which continually organizes for itself the smallest structure of domination, the family, on which needs children and heirs to hold fast, psychologically too, to an attained measure of power, influence, and wealth, in order to prepare for long-range tasks, for solidarity of instinct between the centuries. Marriage as an institution involves the affirmation of the largest and most enduring form of organization. When society cannot affirm itself as a whole, down to the most distant generations, then marriage has altogether no meaning. Modern marriage has lost its meaning. Consequently, one abolishes it. The labor question. This, the stupidity at bottom, the degeneration of instinct, which is today the cause of all, where am I at here, of all stupidities, is that there is a labor question at all. Certain things one does not question. That is the first imperative of instinct. I simply cannot see what one proposes to do with the European worker, now that one has made a question of him. He is far too well off to ask for more and more, not to ask more immodestly. In the end, he has numbers on his side. The hope is gone forever that a modest, self-sufficient kind of man, a Chinese type, might here develop as a class, and there would be reason in that. It would almost have been a necessity. What has been done? Everything to everything to nip in the bud, even the preconditions for this, the instincts by virtue of which the worker becomes possible as a class, possible in his own eyes, have been destroyed through and through. The most irresponsible thoughtlessness. The worker was qualified for military service, guaranteed the right to organize and vote. Is it any wonder that the worker today experiences his own existence as distressing, morally speaking, as an injustice? But what is wanted, I ask once more? If one wants an end, one must also want a means. If one wants slaves, then one is a fool if one educates them to be masters. Get a moment here. Grab some water. Ugh. My air is turned off, and I feel bad leaving to go turn it on, given that I only have about 30 minutes left. I am burning up, so I'll be right back. Waiting for me? And I return. Hopefully, less sweaty in a few minutes. Oh, wait a second. I have to check something here. Oh. Freedom, which I do not mean. Freedom, which I do not mean. In times like these, abandonment to one's instincts is one calamity more. Our instincts contradict, disturb, destroy each other. I have already defined what is modern as a psychological self-contradiction. Rationality in education would require that under iron pressure, at least one of these instinct systems be paralyzed to permit another to gain power, to become strong, to become master. Today, that the individual still has to be made possible by being pruned. Possible here means whole. The reverse is what happens. The claim for independence, for free development, for laisser-aller is pressed most hotly by the very people for whom no reins would be too strict. This is true in politics, this is true in art, but that is a symptom of decadence of our modern conception of freedom, is one more proof of degeneration of the instincts. I'm going to look up what this means. Go to the inter-Googles. Because it's like laissez-faire. So I wonder if it's not connected. Por favor. Let it go. So yeah. So like laissez-faire economy. Etc. etc. For let it go is presented most hotly by the very people for whom no reins would be too strict. Where faith is needed, nothing is rarer among moralists, saints, than. I guess it is important to note that I am myself in favor of stuff like universal basic income. I think that's important at this point in time, because I think he's talking a lot about workers and the push for workers and the idea of that if you wanted somebody to control, you wouldn't educate them, but now they wish to be more than what they are, and so forth and so on. But he's also talking at a time when labor was so necessary, not to mention just some labor, but mass labor of the people was so necessary to make sure everything worked. Labor is almost viewed differently. The whole state of labor has changed so much in the last even 100 years. It's incredible. So I personally feel that we deserve a basic income. It's gotten to the point where many things are going to be automated, and we can either prepare for that or be stuck trying to fight for jobs which no longer exist. Where faith is needed, nothing is rarer among moralists and saints than honesty. Perhaps they say the contrary. Perhaps they even believe it. For when a faith is more useful, more effective, and more persuasive than conscious hypocrisy, then hypocrisy soon turns instinctive into innocence. First principle for the understanding of saints. The philosophers are merely another kind of saint, and their whole craft is such that they admit only certain truths, namely those for the sake of which their craft is accorded public sanction. In Kantian terms, truth of practical reason. They know what they must prove. In this, they are practical. They recognize each other by their agreement about the truths. Thou shalt not lie. In other words, beware, my dear philosopher, of telling the truth. Whispered to the conservatives, what was not known formerly, what is known, or might be known today, a reversion, a return in any sense or degree is simply not possible. We psychologists know that. Yet all priests and moralists have believed the opposite. They wanted to take mankind back, to screw it back to a former measure of virtue. Morality was always a bed of procrusts? This must be a person's name. Even the politicians have aped the preachers of virtue at this point. Today there are still parties whose dream it is that all things might walk backwards like crabs, but none is free to be a crab. Nothing avails. One must go forward, step by step, further into decadence. That is my definition of modern progress. One can check this development and thus dam up the degeneration, gather it and make it more vehement and sudden. Once one can do no more. My conception of genius. Great men, like great ages, are explosives in which a tremendous force is stored up. Their precondition is always, historically and psychologically, that for a long time much has been gathered, stored up, saved up, and conserved for them, that there has been no explosion for a long time. Once the tension in the mass has become too great, then the most accidental stimulus suffices to summon into the world the genius, the deed, the great destiny. What does the environment matter, then, or the age of the spirit of the age, or public opinion? Take the case of Napoleon. Revolutionary France, and even more pre-revolutionary France, would have brought forth the opposite type. In fact, it did, because Napoleon was different, the heir of a stronger, older, more ancient civilization than one which was then perishing in France. He became the great master there. He was the only master. Great men are necessary. The age in which they appear is accidental. that they almost always become masters over their age is only because they are stronger, because they are older, because because they are older, because for a longer much much was gathered for them. The relationship between a genius and his age is like that between strong and weak, or between old and young. The age is relatively always much younger, thinner, more immature, less assured, more childish. That in France today they think quite differently on this subject, in Germany too, but that does not matter. That that the yeah, milieu theory, which is truly a neurotics theory, has become sacrosanct and almost scientific, and has found adherents even among psychologists that smell and has found adherents even among psychologists that smells bad and arouses sad reflections. It is no different in England, but that will not grieve anybody. For the English there is only two ways of coming to terms with genius and the great man, either democratically in the manner of Buckle, or religiously in the manner of Carlyle. Where are we at here? The danger that lies in great men and ages is extraordinary. Exhaustion of every kind, sterility, follow in their wake. The great human being is final. The great age, the Renaissance, for example, is final. The genius in work and deed is necessarily a squanderer, that he squanders himself, that is his greatness. The instinct of self-preservation is suspended, as it were. The overpowering pressure of outflowing forces forbids him any such care or caution. People call this self-sacrifice and praise his heroism, his indifference to his own well-being, his devotion to an idea, a great cause, a fatherland, without exception, misunderstandings. He flows out, he overflows. He uses himself up. He does not spare himself. And this is calamitous involuntary fatality. Calamitous involuntary fatality, no less than a river's flooding the land. Yet because much is owed to such explosives, much has also been given given them in return. For example, a kind of higher morality. After all, that is the way of human gratitude. It misunderstands its benefactors. Yes, I am not a fan of the term genius, or the idea or the way that we treat genius. It's more appropriate that you have a stroke of genius and that you're not constantly being a genius, outpouring and overflowing here. You have to spare yourself. You're important. If you destroy yourself, then you cannot continue to find those strokes of genius. The criminal and what is related to him. The criminal is this will probably be our last passage here. The criminal and what is related to him. The criminal type is the type of the strong human being under unfavorable circumstances. A strong human being made sick, he lacks the wilderness, a somehow fairer and more dangerous environment and form of existence, where everything that is weapons and armor in the instinct of the strong human being has its rightful place. His virtues are ostracized by society. The most vivid drives with which he is endowed soon grow together with the depressing effects, with suspicion, fear, and dishonor. Yet this is almost the recipe for psychological degeneration. Whoever must do secretly, with long suspense, caution, and cunning, what he can do best and would like most to do, becomes anemic, and because he always harvests only danger, persecution, and calamity from his instincts, his attitude toward these instincts is reversed too, and he comes to experience them fatalistically. It is society, our tame, mediocre, emasculated society, in which a natural human being, who comes from the mountains or from the adventures of the sea necessarily degenerates into a criminal, or almost necessarily, for there are cases in which such man proves stronger than society. The Corsican Napoleon is the most famous case. The testimony of Dostoevsky is relevant to this problem. Dostoevsky, the only psychologist, incidentally, for whom I had something to learn. He ranks among the most beautiful strokes of fortune in my life, even more than my discovery of Stendhal. This profound human being, who was 10 times right in his low estimate of the superficial Germans, lived for a long time among convicts in Siberia, hardened criminals for whom there was no way back to society, and found them very different from what he himself had accepted. They were carved out of just about the best, hardest, and most valuable wood that grows anywhere on Russian soil. Let us generalize the case of the criminal. Let us think of men so constituted that, for one reason or another, they lack public approval, and know they are not felt to be beneficial or useful. The Chandala feeling that one is not considered equal, but outcast, unworthy, contaminating. All men so constituted have a subterranean hue to their thoughts and actions. Everything about them becomes paler than in those whose existence is touched by daylight. Yet almost all forms of existence which we consider distinguished today once lived in this half-tomb-like atmosphere. The scientific character, the artist, the genius, the free spirit, the actor, the merchant, the great discoverer. As long as the priest was considered the supreme type, every valuable kind of human being was devaluated. The time will come, I promise, when the priest will be considered the lowest type, our Chandala, the most mendacious, the most indecent kind of human being. I call attention to the fact that even now, under the mildest regimen of morals which has ever ruled on earth, or at least in Europe, every deviation, all too long sojourn below, every unusual or opaque form of existence brings one closer to that type which is perfected in the criminal. All innovators of the spirit must for a time bear the pallid and fatal mark of the Chandala on their forehead, not because they are considered that way by others, but because they themselves feel the terrible cleavage which separates them from everything that is customary or reputable. Almost every genius knows, as one stage of his development, the Cantilerian existence, a feeling of hatred, revenge, and rebellion against everything which already is, which no longer becomes. Cantilian, the form of pre-existence of every Caesar. Perhaps I will press on here. No, I think that is a good stopping point for tonight. Thank you for being here. If you have been here. If you have not been here, maybe consider being here. And until then, I must always urge whoever does come out and check out what I'm doing to, of course, follow and subscribe and like and comment, because those kind of things help me, but even more so, continue to overcome. And this is the outro. Boop-a-doop-a-doo.